I'm in Audacity, yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, testing. I see little blue squigglies. Okay.
That always feels good. Yours aren't purple?
No, they're should they be purple?
No, I don't know.
Diana, don't be mean.
They look purple to me. Okay.
I guess
okay.
I can see that.
Okay, so we can also clap. I also do a count. So, Ryan, you've never really experienced this before. This is fun. Okay, so let's do the clap. 1, 2, 3, clap on the 3. So we'll start with that. 1, 2, 3. Fuck, I did it wrong.
Wait,
okay, so
clap on 3 or clap after 3?
Clap after 3.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, clap like that.
Yeah, I was about to do it really quick. And this is why Ryan is here with me right now, because I'm like, okay, 1, 2, 3, and then clap on the
I thought we were doing it.
Okay. I'm saying it now. We'll do the saying it for instruction.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, and then clap on the imaginary 4.
Uh-huh.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Welcome to Happily Ever Aftermath, the podcast that explores the movies that influenced how we view love and romantic relationships. Yes, there will be spoilers. I'm your host, Diana Roderick Skonnord. Do you think it's possible that anyone else in the world is doing this very same thing at this very same moment?
God, I hope not.
We're talking about Armageddon from 1998. And that wonderful voice you just heard is my excellent guest, Meg. Welcome back.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here that I jumped right in and interrupted you.
All good there. And what's helpful is that because this is such an epic movie, I had to include an extra guest. Ryan, hello.
Hello. Yes, I'm the less excellent guest, but I'm still happy to be here.
One person for each 45 minutes of the movie.
That's helpful, actually. Okay, so I'm going to nap. You two go ahead, and then I'll jump back in.
I call middle.
Oh, no.
Okay, so Armageddon. It's not like, oh my god, it's the 90th of 90s movies because, you know, the scrunchies were minimal. But it does have a 90s thing. But, Meg, you picked Armageddon. Tell me all about that.
Well, first off, apologies. It's a long movie, and I would say objectively not a good movie. And yet, I love it for inexplicable and maybe some explicable reasons. I guess we'll get into that later. But of the many movies that you've invited me to talk about, this is definitely the one that means the most to me, surprisingly. Maybe tied with Moulin Rouge. But so I have a little story time. I'm sorry, you're going to have to stick with me. This movie came out when I was 15 years old. And up until that point, all of my celebrity crushes had been either boys like Jonathan Taylor Thomas or boyish men like Leonardo DiCaprio. So before Armageddon, I was very into Leonardo DiCaprio. I loved Romeo and Juliet. I loved Titanic. And I had the hugest crush on Leo. And I talked about this a little bit in the Moulin Rouge episode. I was a late bloomer. I always wanted a boyfriend, but I didn't get a boyfriend until college. So when I was a teenager, I was boy crazy. I wanted romance in my life. I wanted all that, but I was inexperienced. So my celebrity crushes kind of like reflected that. Like Leo has what you would consider conventionally feminine traits, right? Okay. He's very boyish. He's got those big wide eyes. He's soft. He's gentle. And to me, as a young girl without much experience, that was unintimidating to me. And I was like, oh, Leo. Sorry, did it look like you were going to say something, Diana?
Yeah, I was wondering. It's just like the first thing that pops into my mind, young Leo, not now Leo, is just like
correct,
harmless, basically.
Yes, very non-threatening.
There it is, non-threatening.
Yes,
there it is.
Which definitely appealed to me as a teenage girl.
Uh-huh.
So I've laid the groundwork for Armageddon now.
Sure.
So leading up to Armageddon, I overheard on a lot of entertainment news shows and saw on those magazines at the checkout aisle, like, oh, Ben Affleck, he's so hot. He's so dreamy. And I thought to myself, I don't really get it. You know, the attraction's not there. But then I was watching Armageddon opening weekend in the theaters. And Ben Affleck came on screen, and I saw his chiseled jawline and the chest hair and the biceps, and I thought, oh, now I get it. And I felt a certain feeling, and I thought to myself, now that's a man. And I was very stupidly proud of myself for the first time being attracted to a man and not a boy. So I felt that I had instantly matured in that moment of watching Armageddon. So I don't know. Strangely, this movie and Ben Affleck are like the key to my sexual awakening.
I'm imagining young Meg in a theater. Ben Affleck comes on. Na 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 na.
My eyes went all sparkly.
Did you imagine you running in a field? Just like, I've never understood that running in a field imaginary thing where you're running to him and he's running to you. And then in my jokey world, of course, you collide into each other and it's not romantic.
And then animal crackers somehow.
He makes a good point about the crackers thing. And then when Ryan and I were watching, he's like, well, biscuits, they're also called. And I'm just like, way to break out the British, you know.
It's true.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're not that sweet for a cookie, but he has a point that they're sweeter than most crackers. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the ability to put cheese on it is kind of what makes a cracker a cracker.
Yeah, exactly. 100% the definition of a cracker.
Maybe cream cheese? I don't know. Really.
I mean, like raisin bagels or with cream cheese, that will cancel that out. So, I'm
just imagining like cream cheese on an animal cracker might not taste terrible. It probably would actually. I don't know.
Well, I can't
We're gonna try that after the show.
I can't speak to the sweet and savory because I don't eat sweet. So this is all your debate. But I will close this debate with no winner because I have a follow-up question, Meg.
Yes.
When you saw Armageddon, did you wanted to see Armageddon? You were invited, or did you see every movie all the time?
I wanted to see it. I actually saw it with my family, so my parents and my brother. So that was just sort of a family outing thing we would do. We would see usually action movies. Mm-hmm. So it was like, oh, let's go see Armageddon.
Sure.
And that's why I first saw it. And I don't think I saw it in theaters again, but I did. Beyond just my attraction to Ben Affleck, I did really like the movie a lot. So I bought the CD soundtrack as soon as I could. I listened to it like endlessly. I got a poster of Ben Affleck as AJ and put it on my wall.
Wow!
And yeah, I know, right? There's a picture of me somewhere where you can see it in the background. Maybe I'll share it with y'all. And as soon as it was available on home media, I bought it and then also watched it endlessly.
I love it. It's the full scope of like almost exactly what they were intending. So I read in trivia that because of the huge success of Titanic, they're just like, quick, we got to put a love story in here. And it wasn't the love story per se. I'm imagining that for you, it would have just been like, oh, was the love story like an enhancer? It's just like, no, he's still there. Okay, cool.
So before I saw Armageddon, that version of Meg would have said, oh, I'm just here for the action movie. Yeah. But then when I saw it, I found it very romantic as a teenager. Yeah. Me today, I'm just like, this is corny AF, but it was very romantic to me at the time.
Okay. No, it makes sense though. And for an action movie watcher, I can see like, wow, this is pretty disruptive. You know, I am at times, I hate it when they shoehorn a romance in there. Sometimes it can be done very, very well, but this was literally like they put the scenes in afterwards. And my 39-year-old thing is just like, okay.
Yeah, because we had not seen the movie before this week, right, Diana?
Correct. This is the first time I've watched this movie.
Yeah, so how was your first time experience?
Ryan, start, and then I will continue.
Well, I definitely have like known a lot about this movie despite not having seen it. I have pretty vivid memories of when it was out, and it was kind of like pretty large in the popular consciousness because there was this like the whole like 90s disaster movie had kind of been like a big trend. And I remember this kind of being like the peak of it. You know, it wasn't creating the trend. It sort of like perfected it, or, you know, it had a big reputation for, Michael Bay wasn't like as much of a household name at the time, but I think this is one of those movies that kind of propelled him to that. And I remember it having a reputation for like, oh, this is like going all the way to the hilt with you know, the disaster special effects and the kind of like destruction porn of like all the, densely populated cities and their monuments getting pelted by the meteorites and such. So, kind of the build up of like, Independence Day and Titanic, of course. And I remember thinking like, I'm hearing like not great things critically, and I wasn't that interested in seeing it, despite not really. I guess I was ambivalent on the disaster genre overall, and I don't know. I guess the fact that it was, the heroes were kind of pitted against a natural disaster, it kind of appealed to me a bit less than something where like the conflict is kind of baked into the premise, as opposed to like, the conflict is going to be like, the people don't get along with each other and they're going to have to, learn to work together or whatever. And just kind of as the years went on, it acquired more and more of a reputation as being kind of silly, and also like the like science issues people love to joke about that on the internet, But yeah, watching it, I was thank you, Meg, for kind of like broaching the subject of like this just not being that great of a movie, because like I didn't want to, insult your taste or anything. But yeah, I kind of went in expecting like, this is gonna be, kind of cheesy at best, and I was not. Let's say I wasn't disappointed in that regard, and it did have its strengths. I could definitely see why people enjoyed it at the time, why people enjoy it now. I think my main takeaway is that like if you take that many talented actors and just give them like the bare minimum of dramatic interaction to interact with, you're still going to have some memorable moments and some good emotions on screen, even if they have basically nothing to work with, which in this case I would unfortunately kind of say is the case, because like story wise I was just like, oh wow, this is such a product of its time. I could definitely see it kind of like picking at the bones of 90s action movies that I enjoyed way more. The movie The Rock came up a lot in conversation as we were watching this, because that was also directed by Michael Bay. I'd say that's probably the only Michael Bay directed movie I've ever really liked, and there's a lot of people who say that like the producers Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson are probably a lot more to be credited for everything that was like really good in that movie. But it was definitely interesting as someone who's seen a lot of those other 90s films that this came out in 1998, so it was kind of like drawing on a lot of what made those movies that are more familiar to me, what made them successful. And it's like, this does live up to its reputation. It's kind of like the distillation of like the most intense version of the 90s disaster flick that humanity was capable of making at the kind of culmination of that era.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And you kind of touched on what I was going to say. So as mentioned, I had never seen it before. Imagine 16-year-old Diana working at her first real job, and the feel-good station was constantly blasting "I Don't Want to Miss a Thing" every 45 minutes, and it's just like, fuck you. But overall, it's just like it was in the culture. But for me, I don't think I was interested because I had Independence Day, which I had attached myself to earlier on. I remember owning that on VHS, and it's just like, well, wait a minute. Okay, so we've got Armageddon, but my thing is like, but I think I saw The Rock later. But there was also Face Off and Con Air, the Nicolas Cage beige Volvo trilogy. So I'm like, I was really into Con Air, like so much. And if you look at it, those movies are just so damn similar in just the whole idea of it. It's just like, bunch of guys, but the difference is it's not the end of the world. It's just the end of these people's things. And so I think a lot of like superhero burnout for me, it's been very slow but surely. It's just like, I'm used to movies where it's the end of the world and we all have to figure it out. So this one is just like, oh yeah, I remember when this was just like just coming up, I mean, granted we had all these different things, but the entire end of the world, I can see why people really enjoy this kind of thing, and the whole terrifying, what would you do in that situation? Or would you make the ultimate sacrifice? Or would you go up there so you could never have to pay taxes ever again?
You've actually really distilled what I like about this movie. For some reason, I'm really drawn to that concept of a world-ending disaster and what that brings out in humanity as a whole and at an individual level. So you get these ultimate sacrifices, you get these big selfless moments. You mentioned Independence Day a couple of times, and I feel like Independence Day scratches that itch for me too. I don't know why it appeals to me. It does. Some movies do it much better than other movies. And we were talking about, before we started recording, one of our favorite movies ever, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And to me, that's the ultimate example. It's going to be the end of life as they know it on Middle Earth unless huge sacrifices are made. So that's something that always really appeals to me. But Ryan, you were saying you were afraid to say bad things about the movie lest you offend me. And let me just say, please, any critique I'm sure I will agree with. A lot of my enjoyment is just sort of riding on that nostalgia factor. It doesn't age well, I'll be honest, especially the humor. There's a lot of, stereotypes and misogyny and fat phobia just like throughout all of the jokes. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this truly doesn't age well. And you also said it's very emblematic of disaster movies of the time. I totally agree with that. This does not do anything new or groundbreaking. But by that same token, it has a lot of tropes that I think it executes well in an entertaining way. Like even just small tropes like the slow motion walk to the launch pad and diffusing a bomb and a countdown going to 1 second. It's these very tired, very well-worn tropes, but they kind of work for me in this movie.
Yeah, and also it's like it's comfort food. It's comfort watching, not necessarily the movie as a whole, but just like the tropes themselves where it's just like, oh, this is familiar. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, now there's a gun. I don't know why.
Oh, should we go into that? Yeah, I have lots of things to say about the third act. I don't know. Do we want to get to that now?
Well, if anything, I do want to touch on the fact that it is Michael Bay. And it
is Michael Bay.
It's great that this Michael Bay-ness is like, I've only heard about, I watched the first Transformers and I enjoyed the first Transformers at the moment, but I'm willing to wager that if I watched it again, it's the same thing. It's just like, oh, no, I didn't remember that. And that's just not aging appropriately now. But for the most part, it's like Michael Bay has a style and it is all over this movie. It's like, I think he was just really, really, although I think some people would say Bad Boys is where it kind of really came into play. So, but I don't know. I'm not a Michael Bay expert. So I just wanted to point that out. And I did find him as one of the scientists at NASA where I'm just like, oh really? Oh yeah, that hair is Michael Bay so much right now. But we didn't really note the cast, but it's just like, Bruce Willis, Liv Tyler, Billy Bob Thornton, Ben Affleck. Not in that order of casting, which was Ryan had noticed. He's just like, wow, Ben Affleck is cast or is credited fourth.
Yeah, I think really the only movie he had been well known for before this was Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
So he was not very large in celebrity news world at that time.
Sure, which is, give it time. He'll be Batman and have Oscars and get engaged to J-Lo again.
Everything old is new again.
Sure.
Or what? Yeah, I think that's the phrase. That is another thing I like about this movie. The cast is very strong. I also want to mention Owen Wilson because I just love him. I love the Oscar character. I think that some of the funniest one-liners that have really stuck with me were Owen Wilson's lines. And This was at a time that I call Owen Wilson's expendable era because he tended to die in movies of this era. So he was in Anaconda, died. Armageddon, died. The Haunting, died. As our friends on Radaptations have covered.
Oh,
with the Owen Wilson scream in The Haunting. Ah, ah.
Yeah, we were both commenting on the quality of the cast, and not just like you were saying, not just in sort of the top names, but this list goes deep. You can go like way down the list and still hit some like really strong names. No, I don't think we've even talked about Steve Buscemi yet. Diane, I remember you commenting when William Fichtner's name popped up in the opening credits. I know you're a fan of his. Yeah, Michael Clarke Duncan, Peter Stormare. And I think we both got excited about Keith David too.
I love Keith David. Yeah. Okay, I was going to shout him out. I'm glad you guys know of him as well.
I always have to pause. I'm like, Keith David or David Keith? Keith David. Woo!
He is almost always a military officer in movies. I feel like he's a police officer or a military officer, and that's just what he is.
Yeah, I was just like, I'm going to close my eyes and pretend he's his character from Mass Effect, and I'll just enjoy the movie more that way.
I'm going to close my eyes and pretend that he's Goliath from Gargoyles, because that's what I know and love him from.
Solid choice, too.
I'm going to keep my eyes open and just watch the movie. And if you keep going, it's pretty interesting. Like, okay, there's Will Patton's character, and he's Chick. And Ryan was just like, what would I know him from? I'm like, I don't know. He's usually like a dad or a second in command. And sometimes he's the dad who's the second in command of whatever the movie is about. And I started throwing out, Inventing the Abbots and Remember the Titans. Apparently he wants to, verb a noun in his movies. But for the most part, it's just like, these are really, really strong actors. But when he went to go see his son that wasn't his son, and then his, I guess, possibly wife, I don't know who she actually was.
I think it was his wife and his son, and just that they had divorced was my read of the situation.
Yes, and it's probably the accurate one. But I was just staring at her. I'm like, why is she so familiar? And I had to flip it on. I'm like, oh, she's April O'Neil from the live Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies of the 90s. And I'm like, oh, this movie, I swear.
A lot of great actors. Not their greatest performances. Not anybody's best performance, I don't think. I think that every single person on screen here is capable of much better.
Absolutely. Because they have since done those things like...
They have since proven that, yes, they can all actually deliver good performances.
So interestingly, also, Jason Isaacs. I wanted to throw in Jason Isaacs in there as well. And I'm just like, wow. And he's doing a lot. Usually it's like the really cool actor that gets such a tiny role and then they're gone. I'm like, no, he's still talking. That's great.
He gets to be Mr. Smarty Scientist guy.
And so the confession really comes in that when I'm like, Ryan, I only know so much about this movie. I know about... the Bruce Willis is it's gonna be Ben Affleck for some reason having to do the thing because the bomb always has to be detonated directly. It always has to be babysat to go off directly.
Yes, the remote detonation never works in an action movie.
Nothing really works in there. And I also applaud Steve Buscemi's characters. Was it Rockhound? Rockhound, yeah, where he's just like, okay, now is this the one where the coyote has to ride the rocket on a slingshot? And I'm like, yeah, this is, so many things have to go right for this to work. So, of course, that's always the case. But where was I going with that? I knew about the sacrifice where it's just like, oh, for some reason it's going to be him, but then Bruce Willis is going to be the dad who's just be like, take care of my daughter. And I knew about that. But that beyond, and I also knew that Owen Wilson died. But beyond that, I know. But that's how I came into this movie. Just like, I know we all don't die. I would have noticed that if we had all died, right?
When I was researching stuff for the podcast, one of the Google search autocomplete suggestions was, is Armageddon based on a true story? So yeah, I think we would have noticed if we were all about to be annihilated by a giant asteroid.
Or would we, Meg? Because Ryan and I were saying, this is 1998. This is like peak all this stuff. There was one thing. Okay. When the first couple started hitting New York, and the cabbie, who was actually Mark Curry, which freaked me out. I'm just like, oh my God, Mark Curry. Oh my God, Eddie Griffin. I said, Ryan, what did he just say? Did he just scream Al-Qaeda? And Ryan, what was your response to that?
I think I said no. This is 1998. No one's heard of Al-Qaeda at this point. Like, not unless you read newspaper articles about the other like very small bombings that everyone forgot about in the early 90s.
So when that happened, I really had to readjust myself because like this movie is pre 9/11. This is
Yeah, it was a nice preparation for later seeing the shot of the Twin Towers just kind of like lightly damaged by meteorites.
Right. So that and also like what's really interesting about that is the whole like, oh, people are slowly starting to figure out about this, and Ryan and I started to get into this conversation of just like, martial law is in effect and all this other stuff, and I'm like, there has to be some group of people that, of course, the movie didn't focus on, of just like, this asteroid's not real. We're just going to go about our daily lives because, what we've experienced now.
I mean, they've made a whole movie about it. It's called Don't Look Up.
I was going to ask about that because...
But it's really an analogy for global warming and environmental disaster.
That was the other thing I was wondering about, all the different just like environmental... Because like, okay, we're rooting... It's not so much what they're doing, but like the oil drillers, I mean, yes, they're doing something and he's like mocking Greenpeace because they're protesting him. And I just had so many just like reactions to that. I'm like, wait. I don't feel so great about, now he's trying to shoot his daughter's boyfriend. Okay, this is my hero? Uh-oh.
Yeah, maybe not the best introduction to the hero. It's like, physical deadly assault on your daughter's boyfriend because you think you own her and treat her like property. Interesting.
Absolutely. But in 1998, that was hilarious.
Yeah, and I think they were trying to establish like he's emotionally immature because like the Liv Tyler's character is saying as much to his face pretty much. Not a whole lot left implication there. And if you kind of track that back, like, okay, so I guess the audience wasn't totally supposed to be on his side when he was firing the shotgun, even though that was also kind of for comic relief. And meanwhile, I'm just thinking like that is just piss poor workplace safety right there. He's the boss, and like there are other people around, and
OSHA is not going to be happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, even assuming he knows the oil rig well enough to know where it's safe to fire a shotgun into, which is maybe a stretch. Right here.
I do think it is important to recognize what a piece of media is saying or supporting versus what characters within that media say or support. So we have Harry acting like an immature, violent, horrible person, and I wouldn't say that the movie endorses that behavior. Sure, that whole scene was meant to be a joke. We weren't meant to watch it and be like, oh, he shouldn't do that. It was definitely played for laughs. But throughout the whole movie, that really is the main crux. It's not the romance. It's the father-daughter relationship. Mm-hmm. And he admits that he's been not the best dad. He admits that he has acted poorly. So really that is the growth of the character, if we can say that about this movie. Mm-hmm. I will just say none of the characters are richly drawn, but to be charitable, if there is a character arc, it's that he mends his relationship with his daughter. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't think the movie is like, hey, this guy is a perfect, cool guy. It's more like he needs some work.
Sure. I agree with all of that. And Ryan, I was going to respond to you saying like, just like, oh, wow, way to give this movie the benefit of the doubt. And I'm sure that was the intention. But what actually happened in the end is just like, yeah, Bruce Willis's character is awesome.
Yes. Yeah, we are meant to fully support and love him, of course.
Sure, absolutely. But I would give them credit, except for everyone else falls into their own realm of these just kind of like disgusting stereotypes.
Yes.
Up to and including just like the nurse who is giving them all like rectal exams. And it's just like, oh, okay, well, let's all laugh about that too.
I've decided that the way to describe this movie is to say, Siri, show me the opposite of the Bechdel test.
Okay, Meg, you said you had lots of notes. I want to hear all of them.
Well, I don't know if I will do all of them. We've actually covered quite a few, but to go back to talk about the production a little bit more, J.J. Abrams is one of the many writers on this movie. And I found this interesting because at the time, I didn't know who J.J. Abrams was. I wasn't familiar with his work. But it's interesting in retrospect to be like, oh, I guess I liked J.J. Abrams before I even knew I liked J.J. Abrams. Mm-hmm. But he is one of 5 writers credited, and in fact there were 9 writers who wrote this script. Mm-hmm. So I think it's definitely a case of too many cooks. This is just too many writers.
Yeah,
it's too many. And I think it kind of shows like the plot is flawed. the characters are flawed. Mm-hmm. The jokes don't age well. And speaking of the plot, so we can just all agree it's a stupid plot. They're like, let's train some oil drillers to go up into space and drop a nuke on an asteroid. And Ben Affleck said in the DVD commentary that he asked Michael Bay, why is it easier to train oil drillers to become astronauts than to train astronauts to become oil drillers? He told me to shut the fuck up. So that was the end of that talk.
Oh, young, powerless Ben Affleck.
I know, right?
It's the thing is, I also walked into this movie knowing that quote, and I'm just like, interesting. This should be. I'm curious, and then they actually kind of address that, where it's just like, these are the people, I want you to train them. He's like, nah, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess they covered that then.
Yeah, they did hang a lantern on it a little bit.
They acknowledged it, which is helpful.
The interesting thing about that to me was that, like, Stamper is saying, oh, you know, I can't train these guys. You know, drilling requires trust. I only, you know, you need to do this with a group of people who were experienced drillers and know how to work together. And then, like, the entire rest of the movie is about the team having, like, petty conflicts with each other and like having to almost having to learn how to work together. It's like this was why we rejected the astronauts, for this sense of camaraderie with Steve Buscemi duct taped to a wall and.
Well, that was explained, Ryan. He had space dementia.
Dementia. Yes.
And that's when my eyes rolled all the way out of my head.
I mean, because Ryan said just like, oh yeah, like ocean madness. I'm like, that's a real thing, honey. No, it's not. Oh no. Uh-oh.
Ocean Med. Oh, right. Yes, I was definitely reminded of Futurama when they got to that. Yes, I want to see. I want to see Michael Bay's copy of the DSM-5 or whatever number it was on back then, probably like the 3 or something. You know?
All I can say is that when they were doing the slow walk and then slowly climbing into the thing, I'm like, oh yeah, I'd be having a freak out right then and there. So I think if he's having quote unquote space dementia, if he's having a freak out, it's just like, wow, how did you manage to not freak out sooner?
I know I would have. And I definitely related to Steve Buscemi when he was like, oh good, I haven't thrown up for 30 seconds. I'm like, yep, that would be me in space for sure. Just constant vomiting.
We'll just call it mid-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
Oh, the worst.
So to speak to the whole quote unquote space dementia thing,
yeah.
The third act is just awful. I knew you guys hadn't seen the movie before, and part of me was very tempted to be like, you can just fast forward like the last 30 minutes. But I thought that would maybe ruin the experience a little bit. But honestly, I have continued to rewatch this movie throughout my life. I still enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Do I skip about 20 minutes of the movie? Yes, I usually do. It's in those moments with the space dementia, and Diana, you mentioned, oh, they have a gun now.
Yeah.
And just, it's so unimaginative. You're in space, and you decide that you need to have the tension revolve around a gunfight. And that just seems like so boring to me. In the third act, anything that can go wrong does go wrong. Mm-hmm. And despite so much happening, which you think would add to the tension, it actually just sucks all of the momentum out of the movie. And I find myself being so bored, and that last act really, really drags for me.
Right. I agree. It's there is a gigantic thing hurling towards Earth. Let's add a gun for the sake of that. And the whole thing about, like, you know, protocol and chain of command, I understand that, but that was one of the tropes that came in, just like, you know, I'm just following orders, and the other guy's just like, quick, do this something behind the scenes to where we're doing a thing, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, but I'm very conflicted right now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I read somewhere that the scene with the gun was sort of like a late addition after they had already kind of gotten the Air Force to sign off on a cut of the movie, and they were just kind of like hoping to, you know, seek forgiveness rather than ask permission about, like, the resident Air Force officer has this contingency plan that needs him to, like, pull a pistol on the rest of the crew so they won't stop him from making the nuke go off early. And yeah, I'm not an expert, but I remember looking at that. It's like, that doesn't, you know, the U.S. military only issues like a small handful of pistols, and I don't think that's one of them. But it's like because all the technical advisors were out to lunch. That actually makes sense. And
do you think they had technical advisors?
I'm sure they had like a few people sitting around to like, please write down everything you see that's wrong and put it in this box, and we'll choose whether to read it later. You know, this
and we will ignore it.
yeah, I mean, there's this great story about new hires at NASA being shown this movie and being asked to find every inaccuracy they can, and that I believe the number is like 180 or something like that. and our armchair guy who took some physics classes all resist the temptation to point out all the ones I spotted, except one, just because this had more to do with like the sort of like math of the filmmaking, that they invent this explanation for like why there's gravity on the asteroid, which like it would have some gravitational attraction, but not nearly enough to like walk around and stuff. And they say that like they have these jets on like their suits and vehicles that are constantly thrusting upwards, so that it's like pushing down, which is like, okay, you know, it's like, hey, you don't want to do this like Apollo 13 where you like shoot the entire movie in an airplane that's like doing maneuvers to simulate low gravity. Oh, okay, you need to invent some reason for there to be gravity. But then when like when they need to jump the vehicle over the canyon, that comes back and it's like, oh, we'll just turn the you know, convenient plot device of this gravity off so that this thing can float through space for like the one moment of being almost weightless, and then we'll turn it back on so we can do the landing. It's like, oh, that like, you know, I was along for the ride for like, they just want the actors to be able to walk around the soundstage like they're not in space, but then they're also using this to solve a problem. That's a little odd, but whatever, you know.
They just do whatever is most convenient for the plot.
yeah,
that's helpful.
I'm sure one of those 6 writers signed off on it and thought it was fine. So
you're saying your threshold for suspension of disbelief was perhaps lower than mine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to enjoy, you know, hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi, because, you know, every story has kind of a way, it's like it has a way of positioning itself as like, you know, here's how seriously you're supposed to take like sort of the physics and the science of the situation. And, you know, I'm definitely like, you know, not the kind of nerd who's like going to be nitpicking a movie where nitpicking doesn't belong, but it is weird when a movie like kind of jumps around, where it like starts off with like the voiceover explaining the physics of the asteroid impact and how it's going to have all these effects, as though it's like, oh, okay, this is sci-fi, where it's you know, kind of like extrapolating what would actually happen in real life, and such were going to happen. And then like later on in the story, it's like, look over here, there's magic jets and stuff. So, you know, but that's not even. That wasn't even really that much in the forefront of my mind. I just thought it was particularly funny. It's like, oh, we can turn the magic jets off to make the vehicle fly. That's just.
You know, this particular movie just kind of gave me a craving for watching Sunshine and Interstellar.
Both excellent movies,
Mm-hmm.
and I would also throw in a recommendation for Seven Eves, a novel by Neil Stephenson,
Nice.
which is, I think, the best apocalyptic world-ending space event thing I've ever consumed. I love it.
Ryan will be writing that down.
I think I actually already have that loaded on my Nook. I grabbed it in some kind of promotion.
Yeah.
Read it when you're ready for 1,000 pages of hard sci-fi.
Right. Yeah, no, I've read Neil Stephenson before. I know what I'm getting into. But
You know what you're in for. Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, that's good stuff.
I will say in Michael Bay's defense that he did have a moment where he felt he needed to apologize for Armageddon. So in an interview with the Miami Herald in 2013, he said, "We had to do the whole movie in 16 weeks. It was a massive undertaking. That was not fair to the movie. I would redo the entire third act if I could, but the studio literally took the movie away from us. It was terrible. My visual effects supervisor had a nervous breakdown, so I had to be in charge of that." So, you know, he has a little bit of self-reflection, kind of. He does also blame the studio, obviously, for a lot of the problems in the third act. But I'm like, yeah, I wish you had redone the third act as well.
I want to see that cut, you know?
I know, right?
It will never happen, but it's like, oh, there's interesting.
So he has a little bit of self-awareness about how the movie sort of wrapped up. But for as poorly as it did among critics, it was very well received by audiences. And I believe it was even the highest grossing film of that year.
Sure.
So I don't think he had too many regrets about the final cut.
I wonder if there's enough material in there for like a fan edit. You know, I've gone down the rabbit hole of like people who cut the Star Wars prequel trilogy into like one decent movie. You know,
Yeah.
might not be enough to work with in the runtime of Armageddon, but
Or the Hobbit supercut.
Right.
Okay, so this movie is just exploding with, you know, action and just, you know, you're right, Meg. This is really about, you know, a relationship between a father and daughter. In terms of, you know, Grace and AJ's relationship, did any of that just kind of imprint onto young Meg?
Oh, for sure. I mentioned Titanic earlier in this episode, which I would say objectively is a far more romantic movie. It's kind of a, you know, one of the classic examples of a romantic movie. Mm-hmm. And yet, for some reason, this movie resonated with me as romantic, almost on the same level as Titanic. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was just because I, you know, had heart eyes for Ben Affleck. But it did really resonate with me. If we're answering the question, when did this couple fall in love? I guess I'll just preface everything I'm about to say with that I think that this movie was designed to be entertaining, to be a summer blockbuster. Mm-hmm. As you guys said, not a lot of thought went into this romance. And therefore, I also did not put a lot of thought into the romance. I was just kind of like, if you tell me they're in love, I will believe it. So by the time we meet them, they have already been in a relationship for 5 months. Mm-hmm. AJ says that he's worked for Harry for 5 years, so that leads me to believe that they've known each other for even longer. Mm-hmm. AJ says to Harry, I love her. She says, I've fallen in love with a roughneck. And I'm like, you know what? I believe them. I'm going to believe that they've fallen in love off screen. 5 months is a relatively short time to romance someone, but it's not too short. I can believe that someone would get married after 5 months. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, yeah, okay, they fell in love off screen. I believe it. They are both young, and the character of Harry points this out to him. She's like, I chose him, Harry. He's my choice. And he says, he's the only one in your age bracket, Grace. That's not a choice. It's a lack of options. And it's like, well, yeah, there's probably some truth to that, but I still support / endorse it.
Oh, no. That's, first of all, you came with like more facts than I was prepared for, which is like, oh, that's very helpful. Just the whole working with him for 5 years. With Harry.
Have I mentioned I've watched this movie a few times?
But no, that's great, because if you listen to the rest of the crew when they're, you know, trying to defend the fact that they put it in the realm of just like, Grace is growing up, she's discovering her sexuality. I'm like, you did not need to put it that way.
No, definitely not. Especially when they follow that up with, we all feel like dads to her. It's like, you just said that she was a major babe.
I know.
Like, please stop.
Don't stop.
Yeah, creepy uncles.
But also, yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's something we were talking about, like the sort of, and maybe this is going along with Harry's, you know, kind of like immature outlook on it, but the way that all the guys are kind of talking about her like she's an adolescent. It's like, oh, she's just starting to come into her sexuality. She's just starting to have these feelings. It's like, isn't she like 25? You know, like
how old was she? Do we know?
Well, so I know that Liv Tyler was 20 or 21.
Okay.
Jeez.
And if we look at the canonical how old is the Grace character, we don't know for sure. Mm-hmm. But during this exact scene where all the uncles are like giving Harry a pep talk or whatever, one of them says she's old enough to vote, which to me says she's at least 21.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's not an adolescent. She's not some teenager who just had her period, even though they did talk about Rockhound teaching her to use tampons earlier in the movie.
He taught her. He didn't show her.
He didn't show her.
Not to mention, like, I okay, so if she's, in the 21 realm, I was about to say, she really is holding her own on just, like, the client relationship aspect of the business. Like, she's clearly, able to speak, she's multilingual, and if you've got clients over there, she's probably doing that in a couple of different areas. So I'm just like, I don't want it to be one of those movies where it's just like, she's 21, but also she's been in space, and also she's, multilingual, and also she, obviously that's not the case, but, one of those, like...
Well, if Steve Buscemi can have, like, 2 doctorates, I don't see why she can't have, like, 5
Right?
languages in it.
But he's not 21, honey. He's, probably in his late 40s? I don't know. It's
How old
really
was
hard
he
to
back?
tell.
Yeah, I know. And he's got one of the... He could be, like... If you told me he was, like, 32 when they shot this, I'd probably believe it. He's just got
I
one
would
of those
believe
faces,
that. Right. Character actors, basically. But
I will say one thing that I did like about the Grace character is that it would have been very easy to make her one of those tomboyish, I'm not like the other girls type of characters, because she says, I was raised among what they call roughnecks, and they keep using this term, and she's on this oil rig with a bunch of dudes, but yet she's very conventionally feminine. She doesn't act like a tomboy, and I was like, it would have been really easy to make her that type of female character where she's like, I have 5 brothers and love baseball, like that type of character. So I'm at least glad that they chose a slightly different path for her.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because when she said, I've been like this the whole time, and I'm just like, who taught you to do your makeup? It's great.
It's perfect.
Yeah, your hair looks fantastic. Who is teaching you this? There is no YouTube tutorials.
You've literally never met another woman in your entire life, if this movie is to be believed.
Which guy on the oil rig is just like secretly a great cosmetologist and is like doing her hair on the off hours?
I'm actually trying to go through. I would say Bear.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Bear. Yeah, I could see it.
Yeah.
He had good fashion sense.
Yeah, exactly. When I was going through the quotes on how to start this episode, I looked at Bears, and he's just like really into his emotions and the psychological exam, and I'm just like, oh, he's like the only one that I would like trust to go up in space now, because he's like actually acknowledging what's happening.
Yeah.
Was he the Cubs fan too? Someone was saying that the Cubs won the World Series, and I think it was Bear, and I was like, yeah, a Cubs fan. That's all the character development I need.
Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, no. They all have their thing. This is the rancher. This is the smart psychopath. This is the second in command. I good enough.
And to go back to the Grace AJ relationship a little bit, it also did make sense to me that they would be together, not only for the lack of options, but Grace is in this position where she wants to take control of her life, and she wants to rebel, and she wants to get out from under Harry's thumb, essentially. And AJ wants to impress Harry. He wants to show that he's worthy of his respect. And I think part of him is like, if I'm good enough for Grace, then surely I'm good enough for Harry. So maybe it's not the most healthy common ground, but I think they both kind of want to stick it to Harry. And I was like, yeah, I could see them, bonding over that in a certain way.
Sure.
Yeah. It was interesting in the brief window in which AJ got fired. He, attempted to go out and start his own oil drilling business. We see him with like his own drill and a sign, and I don't know. I think I read somewhere that like the whole time frame of the plot was messed with in rewrites, and this was like happening within the 2 weeks that we have to eliminate the asteroid. So it's like, did he just like go somewhere, buy an oil rig, and put a piece of cardboard on it real quick? That's how quickly he was able to start his own business. But I do think that in the brief glimmers of like character development that we get amidst the main plot, I think that definitely reinforces that they both have this thing about like they've been brought up under Harry's business umbrella, and they're both anxious to kind of prove that they can do it on their own. They don't only function as a part of that unit, but they can be leaders in their own right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot that one stereotype: the hothead, the young hothead.
Yeah, the cocksure hothead who's trying to prove he's good enough.
Yeah, and he basically becomes he's I guess like the foremost driller on the second team. Like the seniority is a bit weird, but if it's like I want to say it was Harry and Chick on the first shuttle, and then AJ on the second shuttle, and yeah. And I guess he
Yeah,
was
you
in
would
charge.
think they would have put Chick in charge of the second shuttle.
Yeah,
you would
actually,
think.
now that you mention it. That's...
Yeah.
But then he wouldn't be the second in command.
But then
Right.
plot reasons, we wouldn't have the drama of them thinking AJ was dead for a little while.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you, Meg, in the whole, if the movie says they're in love, absolutely. I don't have enough cynicism absorbed for their relationship because I'm too busy saving it for, like, the impending disaster of just, like, Wile E. Coyote measures of trying to save the world. But I like that you mentioned that, that he'd been working for Harry for 5 years. So if it's as tight-knit as all of this is, there is so much of an opportunity for them to have, grown together in that 5 years as friends and having that be a thing. So if they were just really looking for, anything, they probably would have gotten together sooner at a younger age. But instead, I see there being some sort of opportunity for them to actually grow into the friendship to the romance situation.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
I do like that.
And looking behind the scenes, apparently Ben Affleck and Liv Tyler were good friends before ever shooting this movie. I guess like their families were friends or something like that. But so they already knew each other. They were pals. They kind of joked that on set it was a little bit awkward because they felt they kind of had a brother-sister relationship. So they're like, oh, we have to kiss each other now. Tee-hee, But I think the fact that they did have an existing relationship, that did translate for me a little bit. I felt there was an okay amount of chemistry between the characters. I don't think it was like overwhelming chemistry, but I thought they were cute.
Yeah. They weren't horrible, so that's good.
Yeah,
I agree. I think the at least like the portrayal of the romance came across pretty decently. Going along with what I was saying, it's like you take that many talented actors and just give them anything, they'll be able to do something pretty good with it. So,
can we talk about the animal cracker scene, or would you guys prefer not to?
I open the floor. Please do.
It's one of those scenes where I think it's kind of infamous just for how cheesy and corny it is, right? And this is just the episode where I admit a lot of embarrassing things about myself, but teenage me found this very romantic and, a bit saucy. I was like, oh, animal cracker in the panties. That's that's a high spiciness level, but I thought it was cute. They had the entire dialogue for this scene on the CD soundtrack. So sadly, I pretty much have this scene memorized just because I listened to the soundtrack so much. But I think it's a little bit cute in its own right. And you've got the beautiful golden hour lighting. There's the string lights that I'm like, did AJ put up those string lights? I would find that very surprising. But I thought it was romantic.
My first reaction to it is like, oh, I've heard about this thing. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see why people would definitely say that this was, whoa, what is happening right now? But also I can see the endearing aspects of it. And my first reaction to it, Ryan, I actually didn't even share this with you, but as it was happening, all I could think of was just, in our private moments, we riff in ridiculous manners about random things. And it's just for you and me. Like, I'll give you an example. We're rewatching the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and we'll just like laugh and joke about things that just, like, wait, is like, did this and this and this happen? And then Ryan will run with it. And we'll just start going back and forth. And for some reason, for the next 45 minutes, that will be the most hilarious thing in the world.
Yeah. Oh man, your observation about how all the orcs in the army were like coming out of the spawning pit or whatever, like, or they're being equipped, but they didn't have any pants or like really tiny pants, and that was just
they're
like
Donald Ducking it.
Yeah, just hours of like, oh, they're going out on the campaign and they want to like find pants or steal the enemy's pants or steal a bunch of Hobbit pants and then sew them together into one pair of orc-sized pants. It just that kind of thing could last hours,
Well, that's the thing. I think that true romance and intimacy, there's a lot of goofiness to it. Like, if you're not laughing with your partner, like, what even is the point, So I do like the goofiness of this scene. Is it also cringy? Yes, it is quite cringe. I think it's, but it's hard for me to fall on one side or the other. I'm like, is it cute? Is it the worst thing ever? I don't know. But I still enjoy something about it. Although I will say, don't get carried away with those animal crackers. That's how you get a yeast infection. Like, don't do it.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, one does have to wonder, is it any more cringy than like if you were looking in on that kind of private moment from a real life couple? Or
The answer to me is yes, because I don't want to be looking into such a private moment for a couple.
Oh yeah, if I stumbled
absolutely.
upon that, I'd be like, whoop, turning around.
Yeah.
That gif of Grandpa Simpson putting his hat back on.
Yeah.
That'd be me.
But yeah, you're right. Yeah, when I was watching it, I had a similar reaction. It's like, oh, this is, I actually had not heard of this scene, so its reputation didn't reach me.
Oh, okay, interesting.
And it was like, oh, okay. Like at first I was like, I think mostly just like rolling my eyes at kind of like the PG-13 sensuousness of it, of like,
Yeah.
this is what passes for intimate touching / foreplay. But as it got into the goofy stuff, it's like, oh yeah, that actually is what a couple would be doing right now. So that's kind of nice,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Replace it with whipped cream, all of a sudden it's just like legitimate in like a different sensual movie. So it's just like, sure, animal crackers, you go with what you have. There's an asteroid coming. They can't go grocery shopping.
What's the least romantic food you could use for that?
Right. Well, I don't know. Fried eggs, hot shots, anyone?
Anything that'll scald you? I don't know.
I do think something that makes this scene strictly not romantic, if you think about it too hard, is that the love ballad being sung in this moment is by Aerosmith, and that's Steve Tyler, Liv Tyler's dad. And I'm just like, I don't really like that Steve Tyler, her father, is like singing this love ballad during this scene. I'm like, no, thank you. That's I don't like that.
I was trying to parse out, like, I don't know the full lyrics of that song. I guess I only was really paying attention to the chorus, but I was like, oh, I guess that could apply as much to like, the father-daughter relationship as the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. And maybe that, I don't know if there's some production story. It's like, oh, is it supposed to be both, or was, recorded as one, but they wound up using it as the other, or...
I don't wanna miss one smile. I don't wanna miss one kiss. I just wanna be with you, right here with you, just like this. Yeah, I think it's firmly romantic. Apologies for the singing.
No.
I was about to say, no, Meg, you haven't proven the romantic point fully yet. Go on.
How long can we go before we get like a copyright strike or something?
Before you guys just want me to stop singing, please.
Or that.
I think that would come first.
I mean, I trust you as getting the lyrics right, so that's the reason. But no, I will not push further. No, I'm like with Ryan, where I'm just like, I don't know all the lyrics. Don't want to close my eyes. Don't want to fall. Well, that's not in the realm of my father-daughter relationship. I always want to fall asleep. So
yeah, because like, yeah, I don't know. Going into it, like, let's just say going purely off the title, because that was about all I knew about the song, and it's like, and also, like Diana, I was kind of spoiled on the whole, like, Harry sacrifices his life at the end of the movie, so it's like, oh, is this about he doesn't want to miss his daughter growing up, or he doesn't want to miss the rest of her life, or yeah.
Well, it does definitely conflate, and I can totally understand how, especially if you don't listen closely to the lyrics, you might be like, oh yeah, this could just be like a familial relationship. And I think the waters do get even muddier if you watch the music video, because a large part of the music video is that farewell scene between Harry and Grace when they're speaking over the video. Yeah. But they've replaced Harry with Steve Tyler. So it's odd.
Just a fatherhood twofer right there.
Yes.
Interesting. So that particular scene, again, I had mentioned that it just made me think of other movies, and the whole thing with like the single tear going down Bruce Willis's cheek, and I'm just like, did Bruce Willis cry so Matthew McConaughey could blubber? Oh
man, don't even compare those performances. And also, I realized this whole time I've been saying Steve Tyler like I know him. It's Steven Tyler, I believe.
I've heard Steve Tyler a lot.
Okay.
I think I've heard that too.
I will also say another thing that appealed to me about this movie is that I was a huge Aerosmith fan as a kid for some reason. I'm not sure why or how that happened, but I already liked Aerosmith before the movie came out, so that was actually a draw for me as well. Aerosmith was the second live concert I ever saw, and Kid Rock opened for them, if you want to talk about emblematic 90s things.
Oh, that is a point in time right there.
It sure was.
I don't know. So we had talked about it before where things just kind of like rotate right back into it. I'm just like, yeah, but I don't even know if like Aerosmith is still performing, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were, because how long did the Rolling Stones perform? And there was always a joke, and like it's up there with like how many Rockies were there? Oh, coming up Rex, Rocky 7, and I'm like, yeah, that was a joke in the 90s, but
Adrian's Revenge.
Okay. At the end of the movie, there's a lot of, happiness for the sake of humanity, which is fantastic. But there's a little bit of, sadness for those who are lost, but mainly just Bruce Willis's character, because it's just like, I shook my head when William Fichtner's character is like, I'd like to shake your hand of the daughter who, I'm like, no. That is no way to say I'm sorry for your loss.
Well, and I also love that he said that when AJ is standing right there and he's like, hey,
yeah,
I kind of saved the world too.
But is that the ultimate fuck you to say like, sure, I'm proud for you to marry my daughter, but note that I am the reason that you get to marry my daughter because you get to go away now. I'm going to save humanity. You can never live up to this. Fuck you, AJ.
Well, you know what? Actually, I think that segues into my thoughts on what happens after the movie. If you don't mind, may I?
Go for it.
So this is the part where I thought about it too hard. I am giving this movie too much credit. But to quote Sandra Bullock's character from Speed, I always think about the quote when I'm watching other movies. Relationships that start under intense circumstances, they never last. And I can't think of any more intense circumstances than the literal end of the world. But yeah, I do think that Grace and AJ, we see that they get married. This is happening over the beginning of the end credits. I think it starts out wonderfully. They're very happy in their marriage. AJ is a hero to humanity. They make a comfortable amount of money just on interviews and book deals and
tax-free
adaptations. And what?
Tax-free.
Yes, tax-free. They worked that into their deal with the government. But yeah, I think this whole time the specter of Harry really looms over the relationship. I think that AJ is struggling with survivor's guilt. I think he struggles with feelings of being inadequate, that he just simply can't live up to Harry's legacy or expectations. How could he possibly live up to the man who literally saved the world? Mm-hmm. And for Grace, since their relationship is so entwined with Harry, I think that she's constantly reminded of her father's death and his sacrifice. And so her wounds never really get a chance to close, and that grief is always fresh for her. Mm-hmm. So I think they're just like too entwined around Harry, and that in fact, they do have a baby pretty quick into their marriage, and it's a little boy, and they name him Harry. But eventually they're like, we love each other, and we're really the only two people who fully understand this grief of Harry's loss. But also for that same reason, they kind of have to be apart. Otherwise, they'll just be living in their sadness the whole time. So I think that they do get divorced. They get remarried. They have other kids with other people, but eventually, I want a happy ending for that endgame couple. So I'm going to say that they also then divorce those partners, and older and wiser a couple decades later. They're still young, though, because, I mean, they're practically babies in this movie. So sometimes in their 40s, let's say, they get back together. They have matured, and they're past a lot of that grief now. It's still there, but they're like, oh, we're able to, like, really fully be here for each other now. And they completely retire from the media spotlight, and they just live a happy little life together, and they find their way back to each other, much like Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez.
It's so possible.
Yeah, I think my thoughts were along similar lines. In fact, I think I even remember joking with Diana as we were watching the movie, like kind of riffing over Harry's tearful goodbye speech, like, take care of my daughter, good luck with the survivor's guilt, okay, am I?
Have fun with that. Yeah. See you in therapy for the rest of your life.
My thoughts about where this relationship is going was very similar to yours, because like it is interesting that we're going to have to deal with a version of their lives that is like completely different from everything we've seen in the movie up to that point. They're going to, they went into this mission with it like, being all under wraps, and by the time AJ lands on Earth again, he's a worldwide celebrity. If there's one person who's synonymous with being able to make a relationship work in the limelight, it's Ben Affleck. But that's not that's where your mind is going to gravitate. But I actually think you covered that about as well as I was thinking. My thoughts went along very similar lines. I was kind of thinking like, if none of this had ever happened, if they had just gotten married as like an oil driller and whatever Grace's job title was in that company, I kind of think that would have been a doomed marriage. That like, that at least that's what I was thinking before we started talking. You did make some really interesting points about how if they've known each other for 5 years and only just now started dating, that there could be a much stronger foundation to the relationship than the movie was letting on. But yeah, it is a problem that it came out of this like, very limited set of social circumstances, and that, they don't have a super good foundation for, building like a full domestic life together instead of like just kind of, living on an oil rig together. But yeah, the ending of the movie just kind of challenged us to imagine how they're going to function in this like completely different life context, and that everything is going to, revolve around, speaking engagements and so forth. Yeah, I think it would at minimum strain the relationship and kind of force them to, grow into their, they're very young adults at that point, and kind of in that phase of your life where you're still figuring everything out, and they're going to have to figure themselves out in that context. And if there's one thing that I think could save that, it would be finding a way to retreat from it and like figure out what really matters. Because it's like, AJ is this very driven guy who wanted to, he was ambitious and arrogant and was keen to start his own company. And, if that's what he was living for before, what is he living for now? And, if we can find a way for that to work for them, it would be about like getting back to what were they trying to save in the first place, and the answer is international montages of mostly like very ethnically or nationally stereotyped scenes of people at home, the ordinary families who don't want to be crushed by falling rocks, and if they can, and yeah, it does kind of come down to like, will they find a way to retreat from the limelight and become, an ordinary family as one would find in, international Michael Bay montage, and I hope they do. I hope they find that,
Right. So what you described, the both of you, it really helped kind of solidify what I wanted to say about their future. For the most part, I was also very cynical about them because they're young. They just went through some tragic things. Meg, you mentioned speed, and when the movie started with the very, very 90s CG, obviously we're talking about like speed, CG beginnings versus Armageddon. That's like a big chunk away, but at the same time it just felt the same way of just like, oh, this feels like the 90s again.
The first half and the second half of the 90s almost feel like different decades from as far as movies go, And wasn't Independence Day 1995? That was like the boundary. It was like right in the middle,
Right, exactly. So ultimately, like, yes, they're very, very happy in the footage of them being married. I was actually imagining like real life astronauts. I know it's not the same as the people saving the world, but like real life astronauts that did some, incredibly monumental things. A lot of them were able to go back into just kind of private life. So I can see them wanting to do that, just going back into wanting to be private. And with the government's help, they're able to do that to a certain extent. And so I see there being kids as well. And also, yeah, definitely one named Harry. Which, that can't not happen, but that would be at AJ's insistence, so that would be part of it. But I do see some like conflict in there, and there's gonna be a lot of problems because first it'll be fine, first it'll settle down, and then eventually the survivor's guilt, the adrenaline will have worn off, and eventually they'll have to face the fact that there's regular grief to be had. Saving the world or not, you just had to gone through this incredibly traumatic experience. You lost your, father, figure that's going to have some problems. So there's going to be like a separation where they're able to function independently, but still, be in each other's spheres, and then eventually reconciliation. So there won't be like a full on divorce. There's going to be a stubbornness on both their parts. If they're anything like taking Harry into consideration, they're not going to get divorced because divorce means failure, and they don't do that. So that's
Harry never fails. Yeah.
Harry never fails. Exactly. So there it is right there. And for some reason, I'm imagining it like now, like here we are 30 years afterwards, their kids are adults and all this other stuff. For some reason, I see AJ just getting swept up into like some sort of interesting midlife crisis of just like, I think, they asked me to be on Dancing with the Stars. I think I'm going to do it. So he'll kind of cash in on that just for a little bit because he's like going to be retired from drilling. And just like, I think I might want to do that. So that's the end of that. But ultimately, they're going to try to be living the same life. Him doing his business. I mean, if what Harry said about like, I invested $8 million, like, dude, how much are you worth?
Exactly.
And then in a strange, interesting twist that around this time as well, they're gonna become more in tune with climate change, and then to slowly just try to like, oh no, what have I done? What have I done this whole time? This is not it. So they'll probably spend
saved the world, but for what?
Oh, no.
I was the biggest threat to the earth after all. No.
Okay, ego, not the biggest threat, but you didn't. So I'm gonna say in their older years, they're gonna try their best to try to undo, which they could never do, but
Oh, I like it.
Thank you. This is the big benefit of going last. So
you get to ruminate and build on what we've already said.
Oh wait, hang on. That just dawned on me. Was that intentional where like Harry was like fighting with Greenpeace at the beginning and he literally saves the earth before the end of the movie? Some kind of irony.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Huh.
Wow. I mean, this is a very deep movie, I guess, is what we've learned. It's actually quite thoughtful.
At least 800 feet deep.
Oh, okay, hang on. I know I said I wasn't going to nitpick any of the other sci-fi stuff, but like the fact that like they were treating 800 feet as this very exact threshold, like 790 feet, 795 feet, it's almost there. 802, it's like, wait, how many significant digits were on that number anyway? Like, why did it have to...
It's 799 feet. It'll never work.
Oh man, any other thoughts we want to make sure we get out before we wrap up?
I think I've said plenty.
Yes, I just want to say thank you for letting me talk about this flawed movie, yet I love it to this day.
Oh no, it was a pleasure, Meg. And I have an important question. Have you ever watched a flawless movie?
Lord of the Rings.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well then, coming next week. Damn it, Liv Tyler again.
I love her.
It's April Liv. I don't know.
Nice attempt at a theme month, honey. It didn't work.
Darn.
Livember?
We'll workshop it. Okay. You said thank you. I say thank you, Meg. Where can our listeners find you on your podcasts?
I have a couple of podcasts. One is Indoors Women. It's a pop culture podcast with a positive spin. And we did an episode about Armageddon and Deep Impact, comparing the two very similar movies. That was episode 99, Fight Asteroids with Asteroids. If you want to hear me talk even more about Armageddon, I don't know why you would want to, but check it out. I also am a co-host on Pod Appetit, where we review and recap all kinds of food shows in bite-sized seasons. You can find me on Twitter at Meg Writes Words, or go to Meg Mezeske, that's MEGMEZESKE.com, where you can find me a bunch of places.
Excellent. Ryan, any place you want to send our listeners?
You can find me retweeting HEAMCast at the, I guess you're going to say the podcast Twitter soon. So I'm at Ryan Skonnord. If you have anything you want to say about the episode, otherwise just keep listening here. I'll probably be back sooner or later.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and for the most part on social media, I'm there, but I'm not very responsive, but you're always welcome to reach out. Twitter and Instagram at HEAMCast, that's HEAMCAST, and on Facebook at Happily Ever Aftermath. And there's also, you can email us at contact@heamcast.com. Once again, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Meg and Ryan, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I love being a guest on your show.
And thanks for sending us on that trip back to the 90s and finally filling in this rather large gap in my viewing history.
It was my pleasure.
The gap was the size of Texas, Meg. Alrighty, so until next time, may your aftermath be happy.